afternoon, students. Welcome to yet another session of web-based decision support systems for managerial decision making. And as you might have gone through the current lectures or earlier lectures, you have noticed that we have been talking about different components, what the need of the DSS, the type of decisions, and why decision support systems are important to tackle unstructured business decision problems, which are very common in day-to-day operations and of various business organizations. And we have seen the major components of it, and today our lecture we will be talking about one of the biggest components of the decision support system, which is the database management system. So, without any further delay, let us look into today's slides. So, what we are going to talk today is the database management system for decision support system. Okay. So, this is one component. Remember, we had talked about multiple components as the one as the user interface, Second one we talked about was the database management system. Okay. The third one we talked about it was knowledge base management system, and then the last one we talked about it was model based management system. Okay. We told about all these are the critical components of DSS spread into 4, right, and today we are going to talk about this component. Okay. User interface and etc. we will talk later. So, the major discussion today we will talk about is here again, this is like concept and need. Okay. That is the part we will be discussing as part of this. So, we will be talking about what is the database, okay, and the need of a database, what is the database management system and why is it necessary, what is the directory and query facility. So, these kind of things will be combined together to will be in the schematic, okay, thing we will talk about. Okay. So, let us get into some basic understanding. Okay. What is a database? Okay. There are a lot of definitions available, but the viewpoint here, is the web based DSS aiming for corporate decisions on unstructured problems. Okay. So, we already mentioned earlier, remember we talked about unstructured, structured, semi-structured problems, but here the focus for us is the unstructured problems and how the decision support system is supposed to help it. So, for us we define database, okay, as a collection of related data. The critical thing is it is a collection, and what type of data, we just do not want to call it as collection of data, we call it as related data. So, what are the important aspects of this? The first aspect of it is it should be a logically coherent, okay, collection of data, logically coherent collection of data with some inherent meaning. Okay. So, some inherent or some underlying meaning. Okay. Meaning, it can also think it as, we can call it as interrelated data. Okay. So, it should be a logically coherent collection, that is the first criteria of data with some inherent meaning. Okay. Inherent meaning means it is capturing some process underlying aspect which is generating the data. Okay. Second part we have to talk about is this word, this interrelated data, right, what we call it as, okay, this interrelated data. Interrelated data is usually extracted from is usually extracted from various sources. Okay. There are various sources that generates it, stored for usage in future. You are storing it so that you can use it in the future, and queried as and when necessary to extract relevant information. Okay. So, what you do is the interrelated data, where do you get it from, okay, or what is the source of it. So, various sources are available, okay, for the interrelated data, and some of the sources are, what are the type of sources mostly we talk about? Some of them can be processes, okay, machines, it can comes from sales, customer feedback, HR, etc. So, there are many sources of data you can think about, right. So, these type of data is usually extracted from various sources. Then once you extract it, what do? You store it for the future usage. You want to use it in future, so you store it, and then after you store it, what happens? You query it, or you look for, you try to extract what you need out of this. Information is a loose word here. You will say that you may basically say answer specific question. Okay. So, you query the stored data, you basically going through and querying the stored data to extract whatever is the relevant information for you, or whatever information you can get that, so that the question in your mind, the current question in your mind can be very well answered. Okay. And where do these sources comes into this? There are processes, it could be manufacturing processes, service processes, etc. It could be various machines, it could be a drilling machine, milling machine, it could be a welding machine, sales, the sales of the products or services, feedback of the customer. If in a hotel, the guy who is in the hotel, he gives a feedback. HR is a human resource data. So, how is the employee performing, the annual performance of the employee, etc. All this are basically created as part of this. So, all these various sources creates data which are interrelated in nature, and we capture them and we store them for future usage, and in future usage typically means you continue to query them, or you continue to extract whatever the necessary information out of that stored data. So, if you look in the second form is the data from the DSS database. Okay. So, now the database we are talking here is only particularly related to the DSS. They are extracted from. So, where are the sources of the data? What are the major things? So, this is from business standpoint. We are looking at it from a business angle. Okay. So, number one, it is the internal data. Okay. We usually from TPS. Remember what is TPS? TPS is known as transaction processing system. Okay. So, this can be, in certain cases you can think about it as also ERP data, sales data, etc. These are all, okay, coming as part of its internal data, internal to the organization. So, this is internal to the organization. Okay, that is the internal data. Number two, second part is we talked about from extracted from various sources. So, now here is what we talked, we also look at it from a broader sense, external data. Okay. External data, it is like, is external to the organization, external to the organization, typically. So, from government agencies, trade associations, then market research firms, forecasting firms, stock exchange, etc. So, various external agencies, government agencies, different type of government agencies, licensees, etc., trade associations, market research firms, forecasting firms, stock exchange, etc., are the various sources of external data. Okay. Then comes a third one, which is a private data or guidelines used by decision makers. Okay. This could be what you call as experience or rules of thumb, etc. Okay. So, what we are saying here is that this private data or guidelines, these are sometimes they are not internal and external, this is mostly related to the decision maker, the individual himself or herself. Okay. With this info, what does a database? Okay. So, for us, then a database is designed, built and populated with data for specific purposes, should cater to all sources of data to facilitate all forms of decision making. Okay. So, what we are saying here is that we should, when you design it, when you build it and when you populate it with the data, the specific purposes, that is for making the corporate decision, but it should cater to all sources of data, okay, which includes internal source, external source, private sources, etc., and it should facilitate all form of decision making, whether it is a structured, unstructured, semi structured decision making, all those kind of decision making are something that the system should capture. So, with the database, then let us move to what we call as what is a data. Okay. So, again there are so many definitions of data, but we study this from the DSS viewpoint. Okay. So, we are talking about it from the decision support system viewpoint. So, what is data? Let us define data for the things. Okay. The simplistic definition that we can use is they are non facts, okay, that can be recorded, and have an implicit meaning. Okay. So, most of the time what we can say that these are known facts, facts that are known, or you have a way to identify that this is a fact and can be recorded, we can record it, and it can have an implicit meaning. Okay. Sometimes I also tend to add this, because we can also say that known facts that can be recorded, these known facts, whatever you want to call it, should also be verifiable. Okay. You should be able to establish the veracity, whether this is correct. Okay. Is it actually what the known facts, what you call it, is it really the fact? That you should be able to verify, you should be able to assure that yes, this is the fact. So, if you talk about the known facts that can be recorded, as we said, and have an implicit meaning, then there is a word that we need to learn about, or that we need to consider as part of the data, is called mini world. Okay. So, what do we define as the mini world? Okay. It is some part of the real world. Okay. It is some part of the real world about which the data is captured or collected and stored in a database. Okay. So, we are talking about some part of the real world. Okay. And what is the important thing about this part? We are able to capture or collect data about this part of the real world, and then we store it in a database. Okay. So, whatever the data we capture, okay, we should be able to make sure that data can be, it's verifiable data that we are talking about. This is also, you should remember that this in many books, okay, many scholars, researchers or books also refer to this as universe of discourse. Okay. Some people call it as UOD. Okay. You are calling it as universe of discourse. Okay. So, many scholars or researchers or textbooks also refer to this as. So, when you hear the word universe of discourse, we are hearing about what you are basically referring to is the mini world. Okay. So, another way to think it is any changes to the mini world or UOD, universe of discourse, are reflected in the database. Okay. So, imagine a scenario that there is a aircraft that is flying. Okay. You have your aircraft that is flying. Okay. All right. So, here is ground. Okay. So, it is at a height and it is flying with a velocity and it is going to a particular location. Okay. It is a location. Okay. It is going like this. Okay. So, you can think about as the type of aircraft, okay, air operator, tail number, okay. Then if you just store the height, then velocity and location. If you capture this much, okay, the thing is this will keep on changing. At every time the aircraft moves from one place to another, some of these aspects changes continuously. Okay. So, if you do that, then what do you have to do? You may have to take a date, time, etc. Also, you need to capture to make sure that each one of these height, velocity, location, etc. even though these may not change, these may be relatively constant, the other aspects whatever is changing, you should be able to capture it and make sure that on 23rd of January 2023 at 7:53 p.m. This was the particular height at which this particular aircraft with the tail number VT whatever it is flying at an altitude 5,000 feet above the ground, was flying with 600 knots or whatever it is. So, you understand what I am trying to say, right. So, it is not just that you capture it, but it is captured in such a way that it makes sense and it can be validated or verified in the later time to come. Okay. All right. So, now then let us look, if we talked about what is database, then let us talk about what is database management system, okay, or what we popularly known as a DBMS. Okay. So, DBMS a lot of the time in the simplest sense, what is it? It is a software package. Okay. At the end of the day, the simplest way to say it is software package, okay, or a collection, you can call it as a collection of programs. Okay. What programs? computer programs. We are talking again in a very simplistic terms, okay. A collection of computer programs, okay. Why do you need this collection of programs? Okay, to facilitate, okay, the creation, and maintenance or maintaining, okay, of a computerized database. Okay. So, when you say maintenance, it is not just annual maintenance or electricity or something, it is more like updating, okay, deleting, etc. So, those are the kind of things that we are talking about as part of the maintenance. Okay. So, the main thing is it is a collection of computer programs that facilitates the creation and maintenance of computerized database. So, this database is something that you do not write it in a ledger, it is something that you actually store it in a computer. Okay. So, what are the major functions of a DBMS, okay, or a database management system software? Okay. What are the major functions of it? Number one, the first major function in this case is define. Okay. So, what do we do? Define, specify data types, you specify the data types, structures and constraints. Okay. So, the one of the first function is the define the data. So, you are specifying the data type. So, what are data types? Typically, we have heard about this word in many places. Okay. This could be something like it can be integer, real number, okay, characters, string, date, time, etc. Okay. So, these are the different data types as part of it, right. And then it's also talk about structures, different data structures to capture the data, and constraints. What are some of the, like you can say that the date will follow the constraint of like an what is the constraint is an example is like this. Date can be written as dd YY, it can be dd YY like this, etc. Okay. So, these are all can call it as a type of constraints. So, first one is define. So, the second one is construct. Okay. So, what is construct? Is the process of storing data, okay, also called as loading the database. So, when we say construct the database, it also means loading the database with what? Loading the database with data. Okay. So, that is the second part. And the third part is manipulate. So, manipulate is you retrieve specific data, a specific data, update and reflect the current UOD. Okay. So, what does it mean is that you manipulate the existing data in such a way that it is a true reflection of the current status of universe of your universe of discourse. Okay. So, you can retrieve the data, you can update the data, all of it is aimed to reflect the current universe of discourse. Okay. Then the fourth major function is known as, let us call it as share for the time being. Okay. So, what a share means? It allows, okay, allows or allow, plural or singular, allow multiple users, can also be a single user, multiple user or users or programs, Okay. It does not have to be an individual human being, it can also be a computer program, to concurrently access the data. Okay. So, what you are saying is this concurrently also means simultaneously without causing error. Okay. So, we are saying is that it allows us to share the database, okay, among multiple users, different individuals or different programs, computer programs concurrently, where you do that sharing without any causing any inherent error, without any changes in the database or without violating the integrity. Okay. The causing error in a sense is it is, the other word to show is without compromising integrity. Okay. Then comes the fifth point at this time. Okay. So, what is the fifth point for us? Okay. The fifth point is we call it as protect. Okay. So, this case we are saying is protect the database. Okay. So, and there are two types of protection as part of this. Okay. Number one is a system protection, and the other one is security protection. Okay. So, the system protection typically means, what is it intended to? It is against any hardware or software malfunction. Okay. So, the system protection is basically it protect the database or protect the integrity of the database against any hardware or software malfunction. The common word for this is crash. Okay. The system should protect any computer crash. Okay. Protect the data from any computer crash. Then comes the security protection. Okay. And security protection is against any unauthorized access. Okay. So, that means only genuine and allowed users. So, some people also call it as should not allow for any hacking or anything like that. So, it should do system protection, which is so that any hardware or software malfunction or what we call as crash should be prevented. And the second one is the security protection, where any unauthorized access, or sometimes the colloquial term that we use for is hacking. Okay, that should also be protected. Then comes the sixth point, and the main function is maintenance. Okay. So, what is maintenance here? Okay. It means allow the system evolution to reflect change in requirements, over time. Okay. So, as time progresses, UOD status changes capture and reflect those changes. Okay. This amounts to what we call as the maintenance aspect of the. So, whatever the evolution of the system, okay, capture that and reflect that changes in the requirements, changes in the behavior, changes in the aspect of the system over time. Okay. Now, let us get into what we call as the DBMS structure, okay, and we will try to study this in a schematic form. Okay. So, remember we have talked about internal sources of data and external sources of data. Okay. earlier, and we also talked about the private data and stuff like that, right. So, database structure from a DSS standpoint, we are going to do is we are going to look at from a DSS viewpoint. So, the first part is the internal data sources. Okay. So, these are internal to the organization, right. So, we are going to talk about it as sales, marketing, finance, production, and HR, etc. So, these are the internal sources of data. We can also kind of call these ones as also the functional units of the organization. Sales, HR, etc. They are all functional units, and each one of the functional units you capture the data, and this data is captured by. So, sales will have its own data, marketing has its own data, finance have its own data, etc. HR, and this continues like this. Then external data sources. So, we said some of the external data sources are government data, rating agency, then service provider, etc. like this. Many stock market, etc. These are all aspects of data. So, you have internal sources and external sources, and we combine all of them by a main function called as extraction. So, we extract data from all these sources, all these internal sources, and also we extract it from the external sources of data. So, the extraction function takes care of collecting, extracting relevant data, and then there is one more data source we heard about, that is the, let us call it as the private / personal data of the decision maker. We saw that part. So, that should also be allowed to be extracted. So, the private or the personal data of the decision maker is one other aspect, and then the fourth one is the knowledge base of organization. Each individual knowledge base of the organization is also captured as part of this, right. Once all of this is done, what happens is, from here extraction we create what we call as the DSS database. So, this extraction process is the primary motive, the prime driver of creating this decision support database, as we just drew here. And then this database, this DSS database works with what we call as a database management system. As we said, there is a computer software. What it does? It basically allows you to retrieve, inquiry, update, delete, generate reports, etc. Okay. So, it can do many functions. Okay. These are all the functions it can take care of. Okay. It can retrieve, it can inquire, it can update, it can delete, etc. Right. So, this capability is accessed by the user. Okay. There is a user. Okay. He accesses this through what you call as the query facility. Okay. So, this is the, let us call this as the user. So, there is a query facility that is provided by the database, which will give you access to both sides. Okay. You can interface with the database, and to query the database you need to know what is the data that is contained in it, right. So, the data directory. Okay. So, you need the query facility to interact with the data directory, and using the data directory and the query facility you interact with the DBMS. Okay. So, the user interacts with the DBMS, okay, whatever the input and output, etc. The person has a computer. Okay. That computer provides what we call as a query facility, and the query facility uses DBMS and the data directory to give you information whatever it is. Okay. There is also something else which is should also be thought about this, right. You have other major components: user interface. Okay. Then there is model base management, and then you have is knowledge base management. Okay. All these three guys should also have capability to interact with the database. Okay. All these three, purely because of the fact that at some point of time they will also start storing some of the information using the DBMS, so that it can be processed later and other kind of stuff. So, in a way you can think about it as the DBMS in this case becomes the central storage plus processing point. It basically becomes the backbone of the system. So, you can populate it, or you can you can create the DSS database what we talk about here, right here, okay, through the process of extraction from both internal sources, external sources, private and personal data. So, here is you can think internal, external, then private and the knowledge base. These four options that will extract from every place and create the DSS database. It also provides a query facility for the user to interact with the system. He is the user, and also the other three major components: user interface, model base and knowledge base. These are the components of the DSS also to interact with the system as part of this. Okay. So, with this we have reached the overview of database management system, which is one of the critical components of the DSS, and we will similarly look into the other three critical components, which are the user interface and model based management and knowledge based management quickly in the next lectures. So, see how it is interrelated, how each one of them are interconnected, focus on each one of them quickly, so that we can get into the nitty-gritty details of how do we build a user interface, what are the main things that you need to look into it, how do you build a model based management system, what's one of the knowledge based management system, how do we do that, how do we capture knowledge, etc., etc. All those aspects that are critical to the web based DSS for corporate decision making, we can study in the coming classes. So, thank you very much for your patient listening, and we will continue in the classes to come with the remaining topics. Thank you.